There, my name is Mr. Jack, and I am a principal teacher of science, and I am responsible for the biology lessons within the Scottish Online Lessons directory. Now, my experience of school was that I wasn't the best academic pupil, but I found it easier to work at home, and in a classroom I wasn't focused, I wasn't working as hard as I could, and I didn't process the information that was actually being put across to me. But through hard work, through study, through learning, and looking at how I learn, I was able to now get to where I am today. Now, when I look at Scottish Online Lessons, I genuinely feel that had I had access to this in school, I would have done so much better, because I think it would have genuinely guided me through that learning process instead of trying to discover everything by myself. And hopefully, everyone else can get that from these Scottish Online Lessons and really do their best. Now, I'd like to introduce a lesson today on Scotland's contributions to science, and in particular Alexander Graham Bell. Now, he's a home-taught inventor who actually made a lasting imprint on the world, and through that lesson, hopefully you'll figure out why that is.
CFE Level 3 Topical Science. Topic: Famous Scientists. Lesson: Famous Scientists. The learning intentions for today's lesson are to describe how Scotland has made an impression on the world, to explain why STEM is important, and to state an example of a famous Scottish scientist or inventor and their contributions to the world. As we progress through lessons, you will see the following symbols present. Each symbol has a different meaning. The pause symbol means that I would like you to pause the video to copy notes or to complete a task. The light bulb means that this is key information or a key point that you need to remember. The pencil, whether it is blue or white, indicates that I would like you to write something down. And the small bumblebee with specs means I would like you to answer a question that I have posed to you. Topical Science. Lesson: Famous Scientists. When we ask what is Scotland famous for, what do you initially think of? Please pause the video here and try to formulate some of your thoughts. Now, more often than not, when asked, what do you think of when you think of the term Scotland or the country of Scotland, most people think of things that are stereotypically Scottish, like men wearing kilts, people playing golf, sometimes iron brew, the stormy, rainy weather, and Loch Ness monsters and haggises running about up in the Highlands, okay? Now, that is the things that people think of when you say Scotland. However, what people don't think about is Scotland's scientific legacy. Did any of you think about any of these things? What about the Scottish inventor who created the toaster, the radio, the television, the steam engine, hypodermic syringes and penicillin, disposable contact lenses? There are lots and lots of different things that Scottish scientists and inventors have created that people don't even think about because they are so bogged down thinking about stereotypes. But in terms of our scientific legacy, Scotland has been at the forefront of science and scientific invention and innovation in the world for hundreds of years. So from that, just even short list, I could go on, there's hundreds of inventions that have been made in Scotland, okay? It used to be, you used to joke and say, what have Scotland provided, and you write a list that's about 30 things long, and what did America give us, and they gave us the post-it note, it's things like that. But there's more inventions now from America as well. But Scotland's scientists and inventors have always been, and looking into the future, we've always been working towards progress within society, and new innovations and technologies are created on our own doorstep all the time. Think of recent years. We had the cloning of Dolly the sheep, the first animal to ever be cloned in a lab. The development of the ATM, like the cash machine, that was another Scottish invention. Disposable contact lenses I've already mentioned. Now, these are all modern inventions, but they were all developed by Scots inventors or Scots scientists. Now, as a nation, we've made quite the impression in the world, so it's not all about Loch Ness monsters and iron brew. Although iron brew is tasty. I do love iron brew, not going to lie. But, we have such a varied and interesting history in so many different aspects of, culture, society and civilization. But our actual scientific input into the current world we live in is almost second to none. So from this legacy that we see of Scotland actually having a massive impact on the world around us in terms of innovation and science, in terms of inventions as well, it means that we need to consider career paths and skills for the future, right? So that Scotland can maintain its status among the nations that actually provide so many innovations for the world. Now, the field of science, technology, engineering, mathematics is an ever-changing and ever-developing field in the global marketplace, and as such, STEM careers are now becoming the largest sources of employment in the world. Now, there's actually a lot of work has been done by a group that look at skills progressions in Scotland, and as part of the Scottish Government's incentives to look at STEM, where they've actually now said that you guys, when you're at school just now, will actually leave and be going into jobs that don't actually exist at the moment. So as such, it's going to be very difficult for you to learn how to do those jobs, right? So what you have to do, on the other hand, and what you can do, is learn to strengthen your skills and the skills that you will need to do these jobs. And that is why STEM education is so important in schools, because STEM in terms of careers is changing so quickly and developing so quickly. But it's also speculated in the next few years that the majority of jobs in Scotland and in the country, in the UK, are going to be STEM based. So it is quite important and vital that you start looking at these different skills and the different career paths, so that you can start to plot out your journey through education to give yourself the best possible chances later in life for your future. So let's talk a little bit about one famous scientist and inventor from Scotland. Now, there are many, but I'm going to pick one in particular to talk about. Now, one of the most famous scientists and inventors to come from Scotland is a gentleman called Alexander Graham Bell. Now, he's responsible for a number of inventions that are still in widespread use today, and most of you will carry one of his inventions with you pretty much most of the time. And if you guys are anything like the kids I teach in my school, this will probably be on the desk at all times, it'll be in your pocket, it'll be in your hand, it will be attached to you like a limb. Can you think what it may be? Pause the video and formulate your thoughts. So let's talk a bit more about Alexander Graham Bell, and we'll come back and see if you were right in a wee minute or two. Now, Alexander Graham Bell was born in 1847. He was one of 3 sons to a father who was a phonetician, and that's a scientist of speech and sound, and a mother who was a very well-known pianist at the time. Now, interestingly, Alexander Graham Bell's mum, although she was a pianist, she was actually deaf. So he actually took a lot of his life working with deaf people as well, and it's not necessarily mentioned in this presentation that I've made, but it's another aspect of his life that's just interesting, that he actually worked with a lot of deaf people in order to help them learn how to speak properly, even though they couldn't hear the sounds they were making. That was one of the things he worked on. Now, Alexander Graham Bell wasn't formally educated at school. Rather, he learned at home. He was taught by his parents. So if you think about the fact that you've been doing home learning for so long, and even this platform works through home learning, this was kind of how Alexander Graham Bell actually learned. He would go away and work on his own on specific topics. His mum would help him, and he would actually learn from her. So there was an element of helping himself, and also getting that bit of support from his parents, and that is why the platform we're working on just now is actually quite relevant here as well, in terms of look at what this man achieved, which we've yet to discuss and yet to mention. But he's one of the most famous scientists to come from Scotland, and he effectively taught himself at home. So there we go. Now, a lot of famous scientists in history actually didn't attend school. So people like Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday was the father of modern electromagnetism, and he actually didn't formally go to school. He was a apprentice bookbinder initially, and he would actually learn from that. Then from there he then went on to actually look at different jobs at the Royal Institute of Chemistry, and he worked for a guy called Humphrey Davy, and eventually he surpassed him, and he became the master, and Davy kind of sank off into obscurity. Lots and lots of scientists in history weren't formally educated. They taught themselves what they needed to know, and some of them have the greatest inventions of all time. So that's actually another thing to think about when we talk about education at home and online learning and all these different things that we're now having to look at. Now, you quite often think about scientists, and a lot of people think scientists always wear lab coats, right? They don't necessarily wear lab coats, and they don't always work in fancy laboratories. Now, Alexander Graham Bell, in 1847, when he was born, right, he wasn't well off, he wasn't a particularly rich person, so he couldn't afford a laboratory. So what he actually did was he went to a flour mill that was owned by one of his friends, and he realised that there was a process in the flour mill called husking. And that's when they take the wheat and they actually remove the kind of outer shells of the wheat grain so that they can use it for flour. Now that process takes quite a lot of effort, takes a long time. So Alexander Graham Bell actually invented a device that was used for years within that factory or in that mill for his friend, and this device actually husked or dehusked the grain quicker than the traditional methods, which then meant it was more efficient. It saved money and it saved time, and it meant they could actually have a greater output. So as a favour and as a thank you, his friend actually gave him a small room at the back of the mill in order to then work and use that as his laboratory. So, there you go. It wasn't a fancy lab, it was actually, effectively a store cupboard in a flour mill. That's where this guy did a lot of his really, really great works. Now, he really excelled in inventing. However, when he began to work with his father, he actually began to work in the field of sound and speech. Now, he and his brothers actually went on to build an automaton that could mimic speech by making different sounds. And that automaton is a fancy way of saying, like a robot. Okay, now it wasn't a robot in our eyes, but it was a machine that could make sounds. And he actually used to get people coming over to actually see it at dinner parties and things like that at his parents' house, to actually see this machine, this marvelous machine that was invented. Now, Bell would go on to do various things with sound and speech until he then developed an idea. And this idea was that electricity and sound could be linked together. Right? Now, he thought about this. And he thought, right, what am I going to do? And this then led to the invention of the telephone. So when I said earlier on, what did Alexander Graham Bell invent? He invented the telephone. That telephone that you all have in your pockets. Everyone has one, and almost everyone has one nowadays. And that invention was not, though, without controversy, because other people had actually filed patents for similar devices at the same time. However, Bell to this day is recognised as the inventor because the other people were working in other countries as well, so it was unlikely that he copied them. But the first ever recorded telephone message actually was, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." And that's what Alexander Graham Bell said to his assistant when they first invented the phone, and that was the first ever phone call made. Now, Bell went on to live a fairly lengthy life, and he died in 1922. However, we still see his legacy today in the use of mobile phones and global telecommunications. This is a great example of the lasting impact that Scottish inventors have had on the world. These are devices that were created, over 100 years ago, and yet we are still using them today because that is how forward-thinking Scottish inventors and Scottish scientists can actually be when they get the chance to put their minds to it. So who knows what the future is going to bring for Scotland, right? Who knows what you might do? But it's sure to be exciting because as we progress through the modern age, there are new fields of science opening up, there are new avenues to explore, and there are lots and lots of new discoveries being made every single day in Scotland. Task 1. Using what you've learned in today's lesson, please answer the following questions. Pause the video here and note your answers in your jotter. The answer to task 1 is as follows. State 3 inventions developed by Scottish scientists or inventors. You could have selected any from the steam engine, the telephone, the television, the radio, disposable contact lenses, cloning, hypodermic syringes, penicillin, or even the toaster. And there are a range of other acceptable responses. Question 2. Why is it important to develop scientific and mathematical skills? The reason is that most future jobs are going to require STEM skills in order to carry them out. Question 3. What does STEM stand for? The answer is science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And question 4. What inventions are credited to Alexander Graham Bell? Alexander Graham Bell is credited with developing the telephone. Please pause the video and ensure you have the correct answers noted in your jotter. In order to assess your learning for this lesson, you should compare it to the success criteria for the lesson. By this point, you should be able to describe a range of Scottish inventions that have impacted on the world. You should be able to explain that most future careers will involve STEM skills and abilities. And you should be able to state an example of a famous Scottish scientist or inventor and their contributions to the world. So let's ask ourselves, how did I do today? If you're feeling confident, you're ready to learn something new, you're sitting on green. Well done. If you say that you're getting there but you need a bit more practice, then why not revisit the lesson? If on the other hand you found this hard, I would suggest you try it again. Well done in completing today's lesson on famous scientists. A suggested follow-up activity would be, why not look up a famous Scottish scientist not covered in today's lesson, and create a presentation with a similar structure including facts about the scientist, their contributions to their field, and any other notable information you find out about them.